Good evening and welcome. Thank you all for being here for the Writer Studio celebration of the Pushcart Prize. We so appreciate having you all join us for this reading this evening. My name is Lucinda Holt. I'm the Executive Director of the Writers Studio, and we are celebrating the 48th annual edition of the Pushcart Prize anthology, the most celebrated literary series in America. Tonight, we will have the pleasure of hearing Pushcart Prize winning work from Lisa Bellamy, Lakeisha Carr, Geffrey Davis, Yona Harvey, Peter Orner, and Clifford Thompson. Before we get started, though, I wanted to mention one thing. Jorie Graham was scheduled to read this evening. Unfortunately, she cannot make it, but we will be reading her poem, so you will get to hear her Pushcart Prize reading poem. Before we begin, I'm going to hand things over to Philip Schultz, the Pulitzer Prize-winning poet and founder and director of the Writers Studio, and he will then introduce Bill Henderson, who is the founder and publisher of the Pushcart anthology. Bill, you can take it away.
Well, this is an extraordinary thing that we've been doing for many, many years, because it's an extraordinary thing that Bill Henderson has created. And just a word about the winners tonight, the readers tonight who are winners. They're in fact winners on 3 different levels of selection. And I wanted to point that out because it's extraordinary, so that we understand with a larger perspective what Bill has created here. First of all, we all know, at least for people my age, this age of submittable, that submitting poems and getting them chosen in journals and in literary magazines is quite difficult now. Sometimes in some magazines, you don't hear from them from 6 months or more. So that these readers have not only published their work, their fine work in these literary magazines, but then the literary magazines are asked to nominate writers. From the hundreds of writers they published over a given year, they have to select a number of writers, a handful of writers, to submit to the Pushcart Prize. This is a second, even more selective, difficult layer of winning. And once that happens, then the judges, of one of which I am this year, have to go through literally 1,000 plus, a tremendous volume of work from magazines, small presses, all around, online and in colleges all around the world, in translation. I've been a judge some 15 years ago, 10 years ago, and it was a large amount of work, but nothing like this year. This year was almost unbelievable how much it is. So the people that you will hear reading tonight have actually won on these 3 increasingly difficult layers of selection. This extraordinary thing was all created by one person, Bill Henderson, some 48 years ago. Now, it's extraordinary to keep anything going any number of years, but the fact that he's been doing it this long at this level of quality is quite remarkable. In 2020, the American Academy of Arts and Letters presented Bill with its award for distinguished service to the arts. Poets and writers gave it awards earlier than that. And in 2006, the National Book Critics Circle gave him its Lifetime Achievement Award. Bill has published 6 memoirs and a collection of poetry. He's quite an extraordinary human being, in my humble opinion. Okay, Bill Henderson.
Who are you talking about? That couldn't be me. That's ridiculous. Anyway, thank you, Phil. Thanks so much, buddy. And Monica and all the staff at Writers Studio for sponsoring these celebrations over so many decades. I'm immensely grateful for the recognition the Writers Studio has given the Pushcart Prize. We were at the Strand bookstore for a long time. The place was always packed. And it's meant an awful lot to the hundreds of presses that have been in the Pushcart Prize anthology and the thousands of writers who have been featured in Pushcart. Also, my thanks to W. Norton Company, who I don't make them any money, but Norton has been a wonderful distributor for Pushcart, and they're owned by their employees. Imagine that in these days of big commercial ventures owned by God knows who. I think this is an especially joyous night when we realize that a large percentage of these works would not have even been published 50 years ago, when small presses and little magazines were very scarce indeed. In fact, the really scary thing is that writers would have not even bothered to write, knowing that there was no chance that serious work would be published, and they wrote mostly just for the desk drawer. All that has changed thanks to our revolution, small press revolution, and it's been a revolution around the world, starting with samizdat in Russia during the communist era, and probably returning now to Russia and to countries all around the world, including perhaps this country, if things continue to degenerate as they have. Small presses and our integrity are so vitally important in an era of lies and big noise and big bluster. But all of that has changed from 50 years ago, and I thank all of you out there, all you writers who have dared to actually write stuff that is serious and wonderful. So thank you, everybody. And now it's my privilege to and my honor to turn this over to Lucinda, who is going to continue on with the program. Lucinda.
So as I mentioned earlier, Jorie Graham is not available to join us this evening. So I will be reading the poem that will be published in the 2024 Pushcart. The poem is Dawn 2040 by Jorie Graham. These tiny sounds you think you hear in the house elsewhere. Is someone awake? Is someone alive? You turn around just now. You hear yourself say, I know what finished is. I know the just now, and then the just gone. I am alive. Then it is the sun arriving, rising, just above the edge of your turning, my earth. It's touching my shoulder. It makes me feel. Are you there in this world now? This is the last moment in which we can breathe normally. Normally, I say to myself, the scrub oaks are dying back. The white sky arrives, whitening further. Did we survive at the end of this story? I ask the sun. I give up on tenses here. What were the things we called freedoms? I ask. But the sun, as it rises, is touching everything less and less tenderly, reaching everything. No matter how you hide, no water anywhere. Though here, listen, I make it for you, drip, drip, as I admire your breathing wherever you are now. Reading this, inhale. Are you still there? The sun says to me as I hide on this page, be there as long as you can. Take it, be there as I rise. The lifting ground mist, now is the last moment, the very last in which you can breathe. Soon, now, actually, you must hide from me. You beautiful thing, you human, your lungs, I can crush with one inadvertent inhalation. But how I admired your breathing. your so few years, how you took them to heart and believed in things to the end. The end is a hard thing to comprehend. You did not comprehend it. Now go. I must widen across the fields. The cicadas will soon begin in unison, the song of unison, till you can hear no more. Variation, no rise or fall. Can I live, please, in this unchanging sound, I ask, as we enter further into your day rise? What was that just flew over? What else is in here? I sit as quietly as breathing permits. All's hum, an insect, thread. Nothing unlocks. Yes, there's burning wind sometimes. All is building towards sand's hard thought. Nothing will change its mind. This dune of the future, as it moves towards us, here where we can for now still hide. You there, wondering what to do with your day, yawning as you wake from dream. I can almost make you out in your brightening morning light. You there, wake up, but nobody's here, just the earth revolving, inexhaustible, without purpose, in which from moment to moment, even now, change gathers, inception gathers, and variation, and proliferation, and all is, do you remember? So that was Jorie Graham's poem, Dawn 2040, and I wanted to make sure we read it, even though she's unable to join us this evening. The next reader will be Geffrey Davis. I have the pleasure of introducing him. He has written 3 full collections of poetry, one Wild Word Away, Night Angler, and Revising the Storm. He's the winner of the A. Poulin Jr. Poetry Prize and a Hurston Wright Legacy Award finalist. He also wrote the chapbook Begotten, co-authored with F. Douglas Brown. His poems have been published or are forthcoming in Crazy Horse, Mississippi Review, New England Review, New York Times Magazine, The New Yorker, PBS NewsHour, Plowshares, and elsewhere. He teaches for the University of Arkansas's MFA in Creative Writing and Translation, and for the Rainier Writing Workshop Low Residency MFA program. Please welcome Geffrey.
Thank you. So this poem is about a phone call during which I realized that a friendship I had deepened into something that I realized, like I do with most things, late that it was love. And I think I understood that because of that relationship's capacity to hold not just a sort of grief that brought us together, but also joy and humor and absurdity and a bizarre kind of tenderness. So this is the almost bridge for D. Weeks like this, the universe's dark shoulder tapping seems determined. Over the phone, we swap our latest verses in that old song of cosmic abandonment. I describe 3 bad days on the river, the tender girth of a drifter's pink dildo forsaken beneath Tennessee's 400 bridge, a wild rock dove drowning in the middle of the muddied current, someone's body outlawed for struggling to wash the living from their clothing. Lucky for us, you, and the bird that shat on your face years ago, adding a coincidental laughter track against today's temptation to prove the calculus for sorrow's constant way with us. Although I do not mention my brother gambling with more of my family's trust in the haven of a father's hands. And I have yet to tell you about the rat's nest I upset earlier in the garden and dispatched the blind young in a t-shirt knotted at its shabby neck. weepy for another afternoon with loss smeared across my own hands. As I gathered the deserted pups to smother in worn cotton, then a shallow bucket of water, I recognized the hopeful edge of despair sealed by their hard squeaks. And why today the stunning memory of a fox bounding onto the dark highway, full grace from the forest, bucking my mind's efforts to build peace. I didn't mean to end that fox with my car. I didn't mean to stumble again into the sorry church of shame, heart vibrating with its new faith in disasters. Before hanging up, we reminisce about the landline's obsolete dial tone, how its eeriness could linger with you after the warmth of a friend's voice had been severed from any loneliness at your ear. Just then, the sky completes its all-day promise, and rain starts dotting the street through sunshine. I love you, I say, aloud, and wait once our call has ended. It's my honor to introduce the next reader, Lakeisha Carr, who received her MFA at the Iowa Writers Workshop, where she was awarded a Maytag Fellowship for Excellence in Fiction and a Jeff and Vicki Edwards Postgraduate Fellowship in Fiction. A journalist and writer from East Texas, she has held various editorial and production positions with CNN, the New York Times, and other media. Her writing has received support from the Breadloaf Writers Conference, the Callaloo Creative Writing Workshop, the DC Commission on Arts and Humanities for Nonfiction Writing, and the Cambilio Fellowship for Fiction Writing. An Autobiography of Skin is her first book. Lakeisha, take it away.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey. That was beautiful. Thank you. I want to start by saying, too, a huge thank you to both Bill and Phil. These moments, I never take them for granted. It's so wonderful to be here in you all's company. Publication for me was last year, and it's been difficult, you know. We're very all fortunate to have these kind of moments. And like I said, I don't take it for granted because the writers' esteem and confidence, y'all know how we can be. So it was just really great to hear what it meant to get to this point on this evening. And so I thank you both so much. I'm going to read just a short portion from my story. Yesterday was a dream, today is a miracle, that was published in the Parish Review, I think in the spring of 2022. All these years since publication have kind of blurred, y'all. So bear with me, but thank you. The night, as most nights, was like a dream. At 10 p.m., once I fed the dog the last of the scraps off the stove, once I cursed the cat for scratching my mama's antique furniture, then welcomed him back into my arms. Once I slicked my hair back into a thin ponytail, wrapping it up tight in my mama's old scarf. Once I stayed in the bathtub a little too long, letting the heat of the water do things my husband stopped doing years ago. Once I oiled my body down and up and down again with cocoa butter, I reached for my housecoat hanging delicately against the door, leopard print and silk, wrapping it around my bloated body, not caring if the water or oil stained or bled through. And as if a ghost, soundlessly, I floated to the garage and had a cigarette alone. Mostly I listened to the blues, Lightning Hopkins, Bessie Smith, Bobby Womack, and my mama was heavy on my mind, which was most nights, but especially tonight. So I listened to the blues and nursed a little Crown Royal poured thin over crushed ice, the kind of ice I used to crunch and eat out of nerves, and now just out of habit. I smoked my Virginia Slims, pulling that cool menthol taste to the back of my throat before pushing it out, a thick plume of smoke. Creating that smoke is what I like to do, a lazy sort of cloud that held in the air long enough for me to see the future, revisit the past and everything at once found within that haze. I let my thoughts drift, curl and bend as the smoke did, full with memories before tapering out and disappearing, or as I guess, becoming something else, vapor. My daddy used to tell his congregation that life was like a vapor. here today and gone tomorrow, and so they best get right with the Lord soon. As I sat watching the smoke blossom like a flower from my lips, growing and weakening again, slowly giving away with each second, I couldn't help thinking, there goes my life. I took another long pull, watched the ash stiffen, then drop to the cold concrete floor, and thought, there it goes again and again. Sometimes I reached out for the smoke, tried to grab it and rein it in, but like the life I was living, it always seemed just beyond my grasp. If I became tipsy, I might sing, not because I could or should, but just because. A low hum, a gentle cry, 'cause sometimes I only felt happy when listening to the blues, until I changed the record player to something electronic, something full of shock and wonder, the funk, that beat that lifted me up somewhere heavenly, then gently delivered me back to earth. That's what music did for me. It was an escape, the sweetest escape there ever was, until I remembered my body, my senses, my reality called home, where late nights in the garage seemed a sanctuary, a safe place where I could mourn the life that never was and make temporary peace with the present. Tonight, I did all of those things. In my bedroom, I walked to my bath, the most beautiful space in my whole house, decked out with zebra and lion prints, a jungle, the most feminine boudoir where I house my relief, a long day's exhale, a sigh of regret. There I stood before the mirror nude. There I watched the soft brown flaps of skin fold upon one another, creating stacks and stacks of endless flesh around the middle parts of my body. There I closely examined the fine lines and deep ridges carved like rivers into my face, where it told a story of longing for the unknowable, for the replacement of all that felt lost, of everything life seemed to take from me, from me with the expectation of grace. My eyes were dull, gradually dimming with age, like a fire whose amber coals glowed a deep burgundy in the dark until exhausted, then smothered to soot. Needless to say, I was lonely, and my breasts showed the fact. Their gentle dips against the top of my abdomen hung like plums gone soft under a hot summer sun, ripe without appreciation, ignored to rot while gravity had its way. My thighs were thick like tree stumps, and that's how I felt. Tall, brown, topped with a crown of hair grown thin and thinner still, especially along its edges, where in certain spots my scalp revealed smooth and soft bald spots. And yet I still felt desirable. Comforted with the warm burn of whiskey in my belly, my gaze took in the absoluteness of my womanhood, and for a moment, I still felt deserving of something good, someone who might love me. All of my hidden parts that somehow never made their way to the surface of my personality, day after day after day. Sometimes in the quietness of the early morning hours, just before dawn, when the sky was a dark purplish blue, I felt hopeful, optimistic. And then once my high began to come down, and the faint sounds of my husband snoring across the hall made their way into my own room, I was left with fatigue. And so it was then, just as tonight, that I went to bed, a mess of cheetah-spotted down comforters and black cotton sheets. I slipped under the covers, still nude, grateful for the coolness of the fabric against my skin, to feel it all something welcoming. And then I watched my stories. Young and the Restless, Bold and the Beautiful, General Hospital, CSI, NCIS, and all of the other crime dramas where dead bodies the color of cold milk wound up in unusual places, and cold white people with serious faces and grim speech sought to find the cause of their demise. The hours passed, and just as the sun revealed itself in orderly fashion, and the sound of school buses running like steam trains rumbled through the neighborhood, and the light bickering of children seeped through the thin window pane of my bedroom, I pulled my body into myself, pulled the covers over my head, and shut my eyes tight, willing darkness and sleep to come until it finally obeyed. This was my night, Not so unique, not so special, but always consistent. Thank you. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you Lisa Bellamy. Lisa Bellamy is a writer studio teacher. She is the author of 2 books, The North Way and Nectar. In 2022, her poem Yoho appeared in the UN Network on Migration's Multimedia Climate Change exhibition, and she is thrilled her poem Hair Him will appear in the University of Georgia's upcoming Literary Field Guide to Northern Appalachia. She has received 2 Pushcart prizes and a Fugue Poetry Prize. Bellamy grew up in Wisconsin and lives in Brooklyn. She is Park Slope, Brooklyn. She is a development research officer for the Episcopal Church. Please welcome Lisa.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I loved hearing that. Thank you, everybody. It's been wonderful to be with the readers, and I look forward to more after I finish. I'm going to read 2 poems. I'm going to read a very new poem, and then I'm going to read Thank You for the Tulips, which appears in the book. So thank you to everybody. Thank you, Writers Studio. Thank you, Pushcart. And especially thank you, Philip Schultz, with whom I studied for many years. And every second was worth it. Okay. So this is a very new poem, My Dolphin's Ancestors Returned to the Sea. And this is actually a scientific fact that intrigued me. Why dolphins' ancestors returned to the sea. A bold move, counterintuitive. A rollback, yes, a reversal. They reset conventional narrative that evolution, i.e. so-called progress, is linear. Their hearing was prophetic. They heard the coming of Homo sapiens, pushing, shouting, clubbing, hypervigilance, oversensitivity to slights, resentments. They foresaw the never-ending tit for tat. In truth, they had always detested nuts and berries, foraging in bushes, hard foods, the crunchies. They missed their fluid foods, slippery, gliding smooth down the gullet. When they tried to chew sweet grass, they threw up like cats. They braced against pushy quadrupeds' peer pressure to evolve from 4 legs to 2. Their collective response, a hard no. Vive la résistance. They refused to fight over land, housing, food, governance with, they said, upright dirt monkeys. They foresaw catastrophe, the rise of agribusiness, divine right of kings, trickle down, the flim-flam of effective altruism. They remembered pleasure, friendly currents, long swims between continents. They foresaw the dumbing down of awe. They honored 14-figured blue-haired gods of moist abundance and good cheer, festooned with sea fronds. They shuddered to hear distant footsteps of the gods of punishment and scarcity. They yearned to brood again in amniotic brine, water, and salt. Prepare for births of saints and sages who walk light-footed, light-finned on water. Who's to say Jesus was not amphibious? Belly first in, the females, always courageous, always risk takers, tried synchronized swim and loved it. Move over, geezer, they sang to Poseidon, we'll take it from here. They proclaim that sparse lubrication of land beasts erases the enlightened potential of sex and baptism. They proclaim full immersion in body, speech, and mind. They enjoy being seen as wise, meditators, mysterious. Their archaic smile, Greek, suggestive of philosophers. They relish the dolphin hero meme, how dolphins rescue sailors, direct lost ships out of fog, form poignant friendships with shy children. Dolphins, too, have big egos. They have a proactive business plan. Their beta algorithm links a new stablecoin's price to the projected speed at which they can evolve to survive warming oceans. With crows and the new hybrid coyotes, the dolphins have positioned themselves for a new power alignment, land, sea, air, a triumvirate. The chickpea, not the dollar, not the yuan, according to confidential business intelligence, will be the new currency. Gratitude, dolphins sing, their blowholes, founts of every blessing. They whistle praise, they whistle awareness, they whistle warning. Those with ears to hear, let them hear. So the second poem I will read is Thank You for the Tulips. Thank you to New Ohio Review for first publishing it and nominating it, and thank you to Pushcart and the Pushcart editors for selecting it. Thank you for the tulips. During the pandemic, after I told you, speaking up never easy, I was lonely for you, your kids, and your husband. You sent me tulips. Just like that, you sent tulips. I wondered though, did I deserve them? I'm sorry I was a drunk when you were a kid. Thank you for not hanging up when I call. The tulips arrived in a creamy box, your note tucked in tissue paper. I'm sorry I could not keep your father around or try very hard to stop him when he said he was leaving. I'm sorry I did not love him enough. Thank you for choosing such a nice, funny guy for a husband. I'm sorry I pursued such a crazy boyfriend after your father left. The shouting, the slamming phones and slamming doors, the walking out, the coming back. The tulips are white and iridescent purple. Thank you for your brown eyes. I believe they are still flecked with green, although sometimes even now I'm embarrassed to look you in the eye. I'm sorry I was so sick from drinking, throwing up, and dizzy. Once I could not take you to your dentist appointment because I felt shaky and kept falling. You cried. You said nothing works. Nothing happens. Everything falls apart. Thank you for your clarity. Thank you for your red face, your bursting when you were born. Thank you for your anger when your stepfather and I screwed up the car seat as we drove the baby around the city, looking after her while you were at your conference. Boy, that woke us up. I'm sorry you fell out of your stroller when you were a toddler because I was hungover and forgot to buckle you in. I don't know if you remember. Now you know. Thank you for the tulips. You sent so many, I filled 3 vases, 1 big, 2 small. Thank you for insisting you wanted hipster vegan donuts at your wedding instead of a white cake. That one threw me over the handlebars, drama, etc. Your stepfather was kind and calm throughout and wrote the checks. He loves you. He says later, you get all the money, no one else. In the end, I was a good sport, admit it. The donuts were delicious. You were delicious, baby. All right. And I will turn it over to Clifford Thompson, whose books include What It Is, Race, Family, and One Thinking Black Man's Blues, 2019, and the graphic novel Big Man and the Little Men, 2022, which he wrote and illustrated. His essays and reviews have appeared in the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, Village Voice, Best American Essays, Times Literary Supplement, Commonweal, and the Threepenny Review, among other places. Thompson teaches creative nonfiction at Sarah Lawrence College and the Vermont College of Fine Arts. A painter, he is a member of Blue Mountain Gallery in New York City. Take it away, Mr. Thompson. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for those 2 powerful poems. I'm very glad to be here. I want to say thank you to the Writer's Studio and Bill Henderson and Philip Schultz. And I will read, I think, the first 3 pages of my essay from Pushcart. The essay is called La Bohème. It was first published in the Threepenny Review. And I will start. La Bohème. On a Saturday or Sunday afternoon in the cold early months of 1988, I sat alone at a table for 2 in a Greenwich Village diner, 24 years old, hopelessly young, my notebook open in front of me. At the table next to mine were 3 people, all white, a woman and her very young daughter, and across from them, another woman who talked to the child in a kind way. I recall thinking that this woman was good with kids. When the mother took her little girl to the restroom, the other woman turned to me. "What are you working on?" she asked. I'm sure I smiled. That is what I did with everyone. That is what I do. "Trying to write a short story," I said. "I thought so from the way you looked," she said. "I know that feeling of trying to get something on paper," and she imitated my expression of paralyzed urgency. We laughed. We talked a little about writing, and at some point, apparently, I told her my first name and where I worked. Where I worked was a book publishing company in Midtown Manhattan. Quite a few young people take entry-level jobs at publishing houses because they love books and also often, secretly or not so secretly, want to write them. They sometimes learn the hard way that their passions have very little to do with the day-to-day business of making and publishing books. This is a way of saying that I didn't love my job, but I needed to earn a living, meager though it was, and I was at my desk ostensibly doing that when my phone rang 2 or 3 days after my visit to the diner. "This is Liz," the caller said. She added, clearing up my confusion and handing me a surprise, "We met in the restaurant the other day." We talked for a few minutes, by the end of which we had agreed that I would come to her apartment in the village that Saturday night. Where do I begin describing the young man who went to Liz's place? Let's start with how he looked. Darker than some black folks, lighter than some others. A few people on meeting him thought he was a teenager because of his face and also probably because he was on the small side. 5 feet 8 inches and skinny, 150 pounds or so, though with a small pot belly he tried to suck in. There were other parts of his body he wasn't crazy about. He had the thinnest wrists and legs he knew of. He avoided wearing shorts and swimming trunks whenever possible. And the less said about his chin, the better. Partly for those reasons, partly for others, this young man's manner did not scream confidence. At this point, you may not be thinking woman magnet, and yet our young man was not without experience in that area. He'd had half a dozen or so lovers, including 2 with whom he'd been in serious relationships. He was nothing if not nice, which can sometimes carry the day, though hardly always. If it seems mysterious that this guy had had any luck at all with women, the mystery may be cleared up or possibly deepened by what a woman at his previous job had once told him. "I've never met anybody as good-looking and as underconfident as you are." He might have dismissed the good-looking part, except that he'd heard it from other people. There was a diner waitress in the town where he'd gone to college who told him, unprompted, "You are really handsome," and a group of young girls in the same town who stared at him from across the park where he sat with his date, giggling and shrieking before getting up their nerve to come over and say, "You look like Michael Jackson." None of this helped his confidence, at least outwardly, and yet in there somewhere he had some. It was a kind of forward-looking confidence, not about what he could do in the moment, but what he would do one day yet a ways off. And this confidence, was not only present, but completely absurdly out of proportion to any evidence. Writing would be involved. He wanted to write, he did write, and he believed strongly that it would lead him somewhere. He had a lot to learn, and he knew it, and in his groping way, he went about trying to learn, reading novels, seeking out screenings of classic films that he often attended alone, going here and there to an art museum. This was the young man who made his way on a Saturday evening to Liz's apartment. I, took the subway from the neighborhood far out in Brooklyn where I had a one-bedroom apartment, the place that was my answer to the question of how to have an affordable space all my own. No doubt, as I sat among other black and brown folks on the lumbering J train, I had a novel or a story collection with me. No doubt, too, I was distracted from my already slow reading by thoughts of the evening to come. Who knows, this might be the start of a relationship. I hadn't been in a serious one since I'd come to New York a year and a half earlier. Part of the reason had to do with my approach to pursuing women, which was really no approach at all. It would be easy to put that down to a lack of confidence, but the real explanation is more complicated. In high school, I had a crush on a girl, Cheryl was her name, and I asked my father was 4 or 5 years dead by then, if I ought to tell Cheryl how I felt. "No," she said. She recommended going slow, trying to figure out first how Cheryl felt about me, because if I opened my heart to her blindly, quote, she might tell her friends and they might laugh at you. This was loving, well-intentioned, but unfortunate advice. For one thing, I realized later that Cheryl would have happily become my girlfriend if I had only said the word, and it seems everyone knew this but me. And it was advice for which I do not blame my mother one bit. Good parents, and my mother was a good parent, communicate to their children what they have come to understand. Still, no one understands everything, and it is on the kid eventually to learn some things for his, her, their self. But I will say that my mother's advice sadly fortified my unconscious feeling that there was something embarrassing, something shameful about admitting that you wanted to be with another person, unless that person clearly wanted to be with you. And so, with rare exceptions, the relationships I entered with women were with women who pursued me or who let me know in some way that they wanted to be pursued, cues that I would sometimes pick up on only years after the fact. Now, here was Liz. Even I understood that you don't track someone down at his office with only a first name and company name to go on if you're not interested in him romantically, and it was clear that I could become involved with her. The only question was whether or not I wanted to. The evening to come would determine that, since I knew very little about Liz, except that she seemed nice and interesting, and creative from the sound of things. Some of it, much of it, for better or worse, would depend on physical attraction. I didn't know whether I was attracted to her or not, because at the diner I'd barely paid attention to how she looked. I didn't recall thinking she was unattractive, which seemed a good sign, good enough for my mind to begin to construct a woman I hadn't actually met. As I got off the subway downtown and walked in the winter air to Liz's building, then up to her apartment, I felt optimistic. And then she opened her door, and I got a lesson in how easy it is to con yourself. All right, and I will stop there and introduce to you Yona Harvey. Yona Harvey is the author of You Don't Have to Go to Mars for Love, winner of the Believer Book Award in Poetry, and Hemming the Water, winner of the Kate Tufts Discovery Award. She lives in Northampton, Massachusetts. Take it away, Yona.
Thank you, Clifford. It's really an honor to be here with you and the other writers in the space. Thank you to Bill and Phil, Lucinda, Pushcart. Thank you to Iowa Review for nominating this poem. The Presence of Order. This is a kind of a COVID poem, a grief poem, gateway poem to a kind of healing too. The Presence of Order. After Barbara Edelman and Diana Coywin. Being separated from my family and placed in a public school is what I recall of time. The back to school calendar, the months still lined up in my head, like on the bulletin board the first day of kindergarten. And this is how I view the days even now. December, at the end of a straight line drawn with a yardstick, maybe Christmas trees or candy canes stapled in place before the weeks break as the lines in poems. A year fading away and becoming another year. January at the start of a new line then, the month unfolding in rows, counting the days until spring, counting the days left in June. How many seconds allowed at the water fountain in the hottest months? There were just too many of us kids to manage, to keep in line, to shuffle from homeroom to gym class, from gym class to lunch. When could I go back? To my sister, to my mother, to the day-long, night-long television. All I have left of my sister, I can fit into 2 storage containers, clear, rectangular, neutral as Switzerland or Canada, except not really, because I can see inside a red leather jacket and matching pants I'll never wear, but can't bring myself to get rid of. Where would they go? Who would they flatter? I'd rather not think about it, even after all these years. And so it remains a darkening clot in a plastic box, a brackish memory. My sister did not cut herself out of photographs before she leapt from the roof, but she called several people in our family and gave them a piece of her mind. What I remember the most was her address book, her ex-boyfriend's name scratched out so brutally in black ink, the paper ripped through so much that is how I see him, a living, breathing, black plague of scribble, nameless, bodiless, but somehow here on the earth my sister abandoned. Unbuckle your grief, whispered the great buffalo that began visiting me last June, apart from the tales of first settlers and first colonies that failed to bound the creature to the treacherous West. I trust the great animal so much more than I trust man. How could I not, in this weary war market, in this accumulation of days speckled with disease? Do you have any questions? The pharmacist asks as he brushes my left muscled arm with alcohol. I've read too much. I've viewed too much. I've listened too much, I tell him. What else is left? I can't hold any more information, I say. And when he shoots me up, I feel the exhale, the great long sigh, the defeated breath, like the sighs of Southern California on fire, the sound of inevitability. What's the point? I don't say. Why am I even preserving my health or fighting for it? To live where? To be loved by whom? No, it wasn't as grim as that, really. Just the sound of the soft gush of giving into something that felt greater than me. I walked around the store for 10 minutes, bought some body wash, some toothpaste, some sugary cereal in a bright yellow box, a 2-pack of chapstick. Give me a thumbs up before you go, the pharmacist said. He was kind as Canada, or a thick bouquet of chrysanthemums, sweet as a stick of spearmint gum. I did not want to black out his face or rip through the paper he gave me, tucked in a neat little folder commemorating the day. I was light as a cardinal's wing, unkennelled, sister. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Peter Orner. Peter is the author of 2 novels, 3 story collections, and 2 memoirs, essay collections. Am I Alone Here was a finalist for the National Book Critics Award for Criticism, and his most recent book, Still No Word From You, was a finalist for the Penn Diamonstein Spielvogel Award in the Art of the Essay. Peter's work has received the Rome Prize, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and 4 Pushcart Prizes. He is currently the chair of the English Department and Creative Writing Department at Dartmouth College and lives with his family in Vermont. Peter.
Thank you, Yona. I'm still absorbing your poem. It's devastating and beautiful. It's really an honor to read with everyone tonight, and just makes me think, Zoom kind of works sometimes in this sense, bringing us together like this. I want to thank the Writer Studio, Francesca and Phil and Lucinda, as well as Bill Henderson for all that you've done for us for over the years. I was thinking tonight, how do you imagine a universe without the Pushcart Prize? It's just something that has been so important to so many of us, and I can't thank you enough. I also want to thank Pat Strawn, legendary editor who nominated me for a Pushcart back in 1999. Thank you, Pat. And I'm going to read 2 very brief stories tonight from the current Pushcart, and that's it's called 4 More Stories, but I'm going to read 2. And I want to thank Brad Murrow and the great people at Conjunctions who are still holding on, which is great. Years later, they met on the threshold of a motel room door. He'd driven through the night and still arrived too late. Henry died while he was still in Ohio on the interstate. He'd just passed the pocked lights of the derelict oil refineries of Sandusky when Claudia texted. He kept driving because what choice did he have? He couldn't just turn around now that his momentum was carrying him forward, not just to Henry, but to Claudia. And when he arrived after 4 a.m. at the motel across from the VA, he let her know his room number. At 9:30, she knocked, and he, having not slept, not that he remembered anyway, leaped up, but when his hand was on the knob, he hesitated to turn it and open the door because of how he looked to her. Not just the 2-day drive and his dishevelment, but the years, how they piled up in his face like layers of permanent grime. But what choice here, too? Just as he'd kept driving, he opened the motel room door out of pure inertia. All he had left. Henry passed, she texted. He'd pulled over in the breakdown lane and tried to weep. Henry passed. Henry is passed. Now, he opened the door and they looked at each other. She dyed her hair red. Before it had been red, but not this red. She was the same and not the same, but it wasn't her hair, it was her eyes, as always, eyes he'd never stopped seeing, and here they were, all the visions merging with her actual breathing presence. Claudia stood there, the light behind her, the white-gray light. It was early November. Even back then, they never had much to say to each other. What they wanted was lodged in their eyes. Words useless. Why say them at all? They both loved Henry. They loved each other. That was the way it was. That was the way it stayed. He'd arranged a transfer and left town because it was the only way to live without her, and that was 22 years ago, and he'd married, divorced, remarried, and still, look at her, standing in the morning doorway, the light behind her. You made it. Not quite. I told him you were coming. He smiled. He thought of you, and he smiled. They crumple into each other. Someone passing by on the 2-lane between the motel and the VA who happened to glance their way might have thought it looked like a woman fainted into some old man's arms. But really, it's his knees that just buckled. This is called West Lafayette. They'd lost a child. He fell out a 3rd-story window. The screen gave way. I never got the full story. But I thought I could see the moment on their faces. A little more than arm's length will always be too far. By the time I met them, they'd had a 2nd child, a daughter. I wondered if it made a difference, if caring for the new baby lessened the visions. When the 2nd child was about 10 months old, they split up. This was in West Lafayette in the early 2000s. He was a writer, and she, if I remember, was finishing a master's in public health. This happened. I've become less and less interested in invention. Don't we have enough sorrow already? Why invent more? But the facts don't make any of this the truth. What did I know about them? Two people I was acquainted with for a couple of years. We were part of the same group of friends, mostly grad students and adjuncts at Purdue, all of us passing through West Lafayette on our way somewhere we all were convinced would be better, a whole lot better. Anybody could see that they loved that 2nd child more than life itself. And I wonder if this is what drove them apart, because they also loved their 1st child in death with what I imagined was a kind of static love, crushing, motionless. Imagine the pressure not to remember. After they split up, both began to see other people within a couple of months. Of course, we talked about them. Yes, they were the center of so much attention, those two. Let's be honest, tragedy had made them celebrities. She was pretty and vivacious, short hair, big glasses that magnified her light gray eyes, eyes that were always coated with what I perceived to be a film of tears. She laughed a lot, sudden outbursts of goofy, barky laughter. Then, just as abruptly, she'd stop. In that pause of silence, somebody would change the subject, whatever it had been. Strange, As much as I see her so vivid in my mind, it's him I think about now. I have no memory of his face. It must have been an unremarkable, unmemorable face. He was taciturn, an old-timey word, but that's what he was. He'd stare at you with his mouth closed, never said much. He was unpublished. He'd been working on a novel for years. The talk in our circle was that he was a genius, biding his time before the world would know he existed. None of us ever read a word he wrote. This didn't make him any less threatening to us. He once loaned me a book. I'd said something about memory, some throwaway line about the past being more intense than what was in front of me. He said, that reminds me of something, and he ran upstairs to his office in the closet and brought a book down. I still have it. I never finished it. A brief novel by Claude Simon called The Trolley. Every time I notice it on the shelf, I think of the couple in West Lafayette. Eventually, we did scatter. Our programs ended, our contracts expired. I'm holding it right now, The Trolley. It's a thin blue paperback, 107 pages, and now I remember there's something off about this little book that has nothing to do with the story. A printing error caused the text to bleed all the way to the edges of every page, leaving no margin at all. A little book too crowded with words. Once, before they broke up, the group of us met to hang out on a patch of grass down by the Wabash River. The rains had turned everything so green. The baby was crawling around and everyone was cooing over her. We were sitting on the grass watching the muddy river flow by. I watched their faces for signs of doom. She was laughing about something in her barky way, and he too was laughing with his mouth closed. What made us all so sure we'd find a place better than this?
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our readers this evening: Lisa Bellamy, Lakeisha Carr, Geffrey Davis, Yona Harvey, Peter Orner, and Clifford Thompson. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your work with us. It was phenomenal to hear you read. For our guests who are here, if you are interested in classes, please visit writerstudio.com, that's with one S, to view our upcoming classes. Thanks again to the readers. Thank you to Bill and Phil. That concludes our reading, and we look forward to having you join us for a reading in the future. Thanks so much.